One of the most important ways to advance smart growth in our region is by promoting more investment in our central city, in Philadelphia, in our city's neighborhoods. We can support this smart growth priority by making some fundamental changes associated with the Philadelphia Sheriff's Office. Let me explain why this relationship is so important. During the decade in which the housing bubble took place, those years before and after the turn of the century, we saw a lot of growth in the region, but we also saw something else that's very interesting. The rate of growth in Greater Philadelphia fell to its lowest level since the 1960s. Why did that happen? Well, the answer is really twofold. Some suburban areas were completely built out. All of the greenfields had been developed, and new regulations and suburban NIMBY, not in my backyard, opposition to new development, had restricted the amount of land that was available to developers in these areas. In some places, as a result, there's no land available to develop. What that means is that more investors and developers are going to be pursuing opportunities in the city. It's happening already, and as we emerge from the recession, we'll see more of that interest. Let me give you an illustration of how that interest has been manifested already. In Southwest Center City in 1998, in that area south of South Street down to Washington Avenue, west of Broad, there were 553 vacant houses. 10 years later, in 2008, only 49 houses were still vacant. 49 out of 553. Most of the rest had been rehabilitated and were occupied. Quite a few were under rehabilitation, and if you visit that area, you'll still see a lot of rehab and infill activity going on now. Some interesting things have been going on with respect to the Philadelphia neighborhood housing market. This year you can find kids who grew up in the suburbs and are now young adults, college age, and beginning their careers, living in places like 20th and Diamond, far west of the Temple Main campus, or 16th and Tasker, in the Point Breeze neighborhood, but still very accessible to Center City and to the city's businesses and institutions, and 5th and Berks, neighborhood real estate markets that were highly disinvested during the late 20th century, but are now becoming increasingly attractive to some consumers. The row house, the Philadelphia row house, used to be called obsolete, and the feeling at one time was that there was nothing to be done with row houses but to demolish most of them or all of them. Now, in some neighborhood housing markets, the row house is smart, it's energy efficient, it's sustainable. And that doesn't mean that we'll suddenly see all the row houses in Philadelphia rehabilitated, but it does mean that for a new generation of consumers, there is interest in smaller housing, in housing that's energy efficient, in housing that's located in high-density neighborhoods. And the result is a substantial growth in opportunities in some neighborhood housing markets, such as Port Richmond, Kensington, and Fishtown. We'll be seeing more of that during the coming years. Philadelphia has land that's available to develop the latest housing products, green building products, sustainable housing, energy efficient housing. Land on that scale is just not available elsewhere in the region. And in Philadelphia, we have an opportunity to have it both ways. We can sustain and reinforce a base of affordable housing for residents who already live here, at the same time as we're marketing the area ambitiously to attract new residents, some of whom will have incomes substantially higher than the regional median. I just want to describe the kinds of investors that are looking for opportunities in Philadelphia. There are good investors. Many of them are locally based developers and contractors who year in and year out have acquired and rehabilitated and re-tenanted or sold vacant houses. These are individuals and small firms that are looking for opportunities in neighborhoods. And invariably, they will look for houses in reasonably good condition that are located on stable blocks. They will come in and fix up and sell the house for owner occupancy, and they'll move on to other opportunities in neighborhoods that are relatively stable. That kind of investor is a real positive force for Philadelphia neighborhoods. However, unfortunately, there are other kinds of investors, and with the globalization of capital and the ability to acquire houses over the internet, it's possible for speculators, not only from out of town, but from out of the country, to participate in auctions and to buy up properties in Philadelphia. Some of these investors are predatory speculators. They've learned how to acquire properties, hold on to them in some cases in defiance of city codes, and then in anticipation of selling them at higher profits. And then finally, there's another group of investors, clueless investors, who have seen those late-night infomercials about how to make millions of dollars in 10 days in the foreclosure market. They don't know anything about how to manage real estate reliably. They have no connection with the communities where the houses they buy are located, and they're bad for neighborhoods. The result is that the code enforcement system in cities like Philadelphia is having a hard time catching up with the worst of the investors. Philadelphia's city government has done a good job of catching up. There's more to do, but the current administration has been making substantial progress. More needs to be done, however, to correct the antiquated tax foreclosure sales system that is managed by the sheriff's office. In this system, investors can come into these sheriff sales and buy properties without fearing any scrutiny of their experience and qualifications, their abilities, or even their commitment to Philadelphia and its neighborhoods. And the result is that we can see neglected properties in every section of the city. Many of these properties are tax delinquent. Many of these properties are owned by absentee investors. There's a better way to manage this situation, and other cities have made substantial progress. We need to also. Let me give you a few examples. In Flint, Michigan, a highly distressed city, a land bank takes control of all properties that would be eligible for tax foreclosure sale. And rather than going through an auction process, the land bank pays off the tax debt and controls all of the properties on day one of the fiscal year. And then it works with city agencies and community-based organizations to assign these properties their appropriate uses. Some are assigned to responsible developers. In other cases, small lots are made available to adjacent owners and adjacent businesses for side yards and parking. And the land bank is making money. This is a profitable system. In Reading, Pennsylvania, not far from us, the city is able to bypass the tax foreclosure auction altogether and go directly to the county to directly purchase properties that would otherwise go through the auction process without having to compete against speculators. The city identifies neighborhoods that have been targeted for investment and then purchases those properties from the county so that they can be immediately programmed for investment and the kinds of reuses that the city and its communities support. In Baltimore, the city's code enforcement agency works with private developers to identify areas of the city that appear to be promising for unsubsidized development. And within those areas, the city makes a commitment to put all of the vacant properties up for receivership so that they can then be turned over to the developers that have made a commitment to work in the area. The result is that vacant houses in Baltimore are being fixed up by small, locally based private developers without a cash subsidy from the city. The cost of the city is zero. The public sector is just using its powers to facilitate the acquisition of these properties and their conveyance to developers. We've made some progress in Philadelphia also. One very promising development under the Nutter administration is the fact that the managing director, the center of city government, is now in charge of a blight reduction strategy and has all of the right agencies at the table all working together. That's real progress. In another sense, though, we've made no progress. We're still funding the salary of an independently elected sheriff who has no accountability to the mayor, no accountability to city council, but is funded by the city operating budget. We can't go on with a system like this. In the 20th century, we've got to improve, and there are two ways that we can change this situation. One is to obtain city council approval of a voter referendum on the question of whether the position of the sheriff should be abolished. And that referendum could be put on the ballot as early as the November 2011 elections. There's another way, though, that's even faster. The city could reallocate funding in its operating budget from the sheriff to other departments in city government that are managed by professionals rather than by an elected official. For example, one of the roles of the sheriff is to handle courtroom security and transport prisoners from jail to court. These responsibilities could be handled easily by the city's prisons unit, which is supervised by the managing director. The result will be a substantial savings in overtime costs. These are changes that we have to make in order to defend our communities against speculators and to return more value to neighborhood real estate markets. And this is a year in which we can make those changes. That's one of the reasons I'm running for sheriff. That's the reason I want to be last sheriff.